Rob here at etrailer.com, and today you're going to be taking a look at the SumoSprings rear helper springs on our 2018 Jayco Precept Motorhome. Now here at eTrailer we get a lot of questions about motorhomes, specifically about the suspension. Because let's face it, whether you're new or you've been driving a motorhome for a long time, they don't handle the best because they're pretty top heavy and we have a lot of area here to catch wind, which means that we're going to be able to be pushed around a lot easier than we'd like. We're driving down the highway, a big gust of wind comes, a truck drives by or anything like that, we're going to end up getting pushed to the side and then fight the steering wheel, which by the time we get where we're going, we're going to be pretty tired. Not to mention everybody in the back, things getting tossed around, just not an enjoyable experience. We want to feel more in control and more stable when we're driving down the road. So before we put any of our suspension components on, let's take our motorhome out on the test course and see how it handles. As I come up to the slalom course and I'm going in and out of the turns, I can definitely feel a lot of body roll. As soon as I go into the turn, it really feels like the motorhome wants to lean really hard before it even actually turns. And part of that is because it's so top heavy, but the suspension is just really soft, so we get a really big roll feeling when we're driving. And on the bumps, definitely it's resonating through the seat. Obviously we're going to have a bump, but this is a really jarring effect, and even after I get over the bump, the motorhome still wants to rock and shake. And when I get to the alternating speed bumps, you can definitely feel and see how much the motorhome is really swaying back and forth. Now that we have everything installed, let's take our motorhome back out of the test course and see how it improved. Now as I come up to the slalom course, I can immediately feel a big difference. Don't get me wrong, there's still a little bit of a sway to it, but it's a lot more controlled and it is diminished a lot. I feel a lot more in control of the motorhome, and it genuinely feels a lot smaller than it really is. And here on the bump course, don't get me wrong, the bumps are still there, but it's a lot less of a jarring feeling, and the motorhome wants to respond more quickly after the bump. So it's not continuing to rock and sway quite as much as it was before, and like I said, I'm not having that jarring feeling going through the seat into my back. So here's what our helper springs look like once we have them installed. Now, these are going to vastly improve the ride quality of our motorhome because it's going to absorb a lot of the bumps and shocks, but it's also going to give us a lot more confidence when we're driving because it's going to help reduce the amount of body roll and sway that we feel, and we're not going to have to fight that steering wheel or have that white knuckle driving when we're driving our motorhome. Our springs are going to attach at the top, attaching to the frame, and the bottom attaching to the leaf springs. That way, no matter what situation we're in, we have constant support on the back end. Now the springs themselves are going to have a progressive rate, which means if we don't have a lot of weight or if we hit a soft bump, our springs are going to engage softly and we're going to have a nice comfortable ride. But the harder the bump we hit or the more weight and pressure we put on our springs, the stiffer and more compressed they're going to become. But the nice thing is these are going to very minimally expand to the side. So we're not going to have to worry about any nearby components getting in the way or causing any damage. We're going to have one spring on each side of our axle. That way we can have an even support, and even if we go into a turn and we get that lean starting to go, this spring is going to compress while the other side is going to stretch out. That way we can have a nice level ride and make sure that we have full control when we're driving down the road. What I really like about our springs is the fact that once they're installed, we don't have to worry about them anymore. There's no maintenance involved at all. Unlike airbags, where we have to run lines, monitor the air pressure, and all of that, with our SumoSprings, once they're in, we can just let them do their job and we can enjoy our motorhome. They're going to be made out of a durable, high-density microcellular urethane, which means they're going to withstand most automotive chemicals like oil, road salt, and even gasoline. And the nice thing is, if we're up in the mountains taking a trip with our motorhome, they're going to work all the way from negative 25 degrees, or if we're down in the desert where it gets pretty hot, they're going to go all the way up to 200 degrees Fahrenheit, so we're not going to have to worry about any environmental issues either. Now the springs are going to be rated at 5,600 pounds, but keep in mind that is not meant to increase the payload of your motorhome. They're just there to help support the weight and give us a nice comfortable ride. They are going to come with everything you need to get it installed, so now that we've seen what they look like and gone over some of the features, let's put one side on together. To begin our installation, you want to park your motorhome on a nice level ground. Use the leveling jacks to raise the rear end up enough, just so the tires barely come off the ground. We'll remove one side, and you do want to make sure you put jack stands underneath and you are being safe about it. So now we can start assembling the spring. We're going to grab the spring out of our kit, and if we look, on one of the ends we're going to have 4 holes, and on the other end we'll have a single hole. We're going to work with the end that has all the holes on the top here, and we'll grab our upper bracket. You notice we're going to have 2 holes that line up on the flat section here. Those 2 will line up with 2 of the holes on top of our spring. So we'll place it on top, lining the holes up. We're going to grab a 3/8 flange bolt out of our kit. We're going to go through the bracket and secure it into the spring. We'll grab a 9/16 socket and we'll tighten up our 2 bolts. Now we're going to grab our lower bracket out of the kit. Now this bracket, they're going to be exactly the same on both sides. We'll have a hook. That's always going to be facing towards the back of the motorhome, and this large opening on the front is going to be going towards the front of the motorhome. So if we look at it in relation to our spring, these tabs are going to be going against the frame, so we want our spring to sit on our lower bracket just like that, so that the flat section is going against the frame and this hook here is going towards the back. So we'll go ahead and flip our bracket over, put our spring up, and we can see that we have that single hole in the bottom. So we'll line everything up, and we'll take another one of our 3/8 flange bolts, and we're just going to loosely put this in so we can still spin our bracket around and move it as much as we need to. Then we're going to take the whole assembly and we're just going to put it on top of our leaf springs in front of the axle. You want that hook to grab the U-bolt on top, and that large opening towards the front, you want to straddle the leaf spring itself, so it'll be pretty secure into place and it's not going to really move too much. Now that the spring's just sitting here, we need to measure from the top of our frame down, and we'll find the measurement in our instructions, but you want to measure from the very top of the frame, and we'll come down. I'm going to make a mark on either side of my spring. Now the mark we made on our frame, we need to line up to where it's centered with the lower hole on each side of our spring. So I'm going to use a floor jack to lift up the axle. So if you just put the jack right underneath the hub, we should be able to use it to lift up the axle and line up our holes as close as we can get them. Now that the lower holes are lined up with the mark, I'm going to come back with that marker. I'm going to mark the very lowest hole as well as the middle hole on each side. Now you can drill these out with the spring in place. I just think it's a little bit easier to do it without the actual bracket in the way. So I'm just going to mark all the locations that need to be drilled out. So we're going to mark the lower one and the one right above it on each side. Now at this point we can lower the axle down. I'm going to remove the assembly so we can drill out the holes that we just marked. Now when you go to drill these out, I'm going to start out with a rather small drill bit just to get it started, get a pilot hole going. But you want to double check the back side of the frame and make sure that there's nothing behind here that will get damaged when we're drilling. So we'll go ahead and make our 4 pilot holes and drill out all the marks we made. With all of our pilot holes drilled, I'm going to come back with a 7/16 drill bit. I'm going to enlarge all 4 holes to the final size. With all the holes drilled, we're going to loosely put our spring back in place and then use the jack to raise it up so that we can get all of our holes to line up. Now once we have our spring in position, we're going to take the 3/8 flange bolts. We'll go through the bracket. I want to go all the way through the frame. We're going to do that in all 4 locations that we drilled out. And on the back side of the frame, we'll go underneath and we're going to secure it with the 3/8 flange bolts in each one of these locations. Now if we come to the bottom bracket, we'll have a square hole on either side of our leaf springs. I want to grab one of the carriage bolts out of our kit. We're going to slide it down. Now it may get caught here a little bit, but we should be able to just wiggle it past the spring. so we can get it in place. And if it does get a little tight, you can just grab a mallet or something metal. We just give it a quick tap and they'll fall down through. I'm going to do that for both bolts on each side of the spring. And on the bottom, we're going to have this saddle clamp. We want to have these go directly up against the frame, and the two holes are going to line up with our bolts. Just want to make sure this little tapered cut section is going towards the brake caliper so we can have some room and it's not going to interfere. So we'll take our bracket, line it up with our bolts, slide it into position, and we'll take a 3/8 flange nut. We're just going to loosely get these started so that way that bracket will hold itself up and we don't have to worry about it falling down. I'm going to come back with a 9/16 socket and I'm going to snug up the two flange bolts here on the bottom. Now whenever you're tightening these, you want to alternate back and forth so that clamp will come up evenly. And we're also at that one final bolt that's holding the lower section of our spring to the lower bracket. I'm going to use a 9/16 ratcheting wrench. You can still fit a small socket in here, but it just makes it a little bit easier. You just want to make sure it's nice and secure and it bolts nice and tight. Now I'm going to use a 9/16 wrench and socket to tighten up the 4 bolts and nuts that are holding the upper section in place. Now with everything tightened down, we can lower the jack, put our wheels and tires back on, and repeat the same process on the other side. But that'll finish up your look at the SumoSprings rear helper springs on our 2018 Jayco Precept Motorhome.